You think you're training your body in the gym, but really you're training your mind. And if you don't get that part right, your results will always suck, no matter how clean your diet is or how heavy you lift. Let me explain. Most people walk into the gym thinking it's a physical game. They sweat, they lift the weights, they get their protein shakes done. But anyone who's built an impressive physique knows that they start building here first. Your body just ends up following the orders. See, the reason that most people don't look the way they want to look isn't because they don't have access to the right gym or fancy supplements or the perfect routine. It's because they're mentally weak. Not in a moral sense, but in their habits, their reaction, and their attention. Their mind gives up before their body ever does. And that's the real reason they plateau, quit, or just stay the same year after year. And so in this video, what we're going to do is break down exactly how to train your mind in the same way that you train your body to make progress inevitable. By the end, you'll know how to rewire the way you think, build unshakable focus, and finally get the results you've been chasing. You've probably heard the phrase, your body achieves what the mind believes. Sounds corny, right? But it's true, and it's measurable. In sports psychology, there's something called the psychobiological model of performance. Basically, it means that your brain sets limits far before your body actually hits them. When you stop a set of 10 reps because it burns, it's actually your mind quitting, not your body. The fatigue signal is real, but it's protective, not absolute. It's your brain saying, we're uncomfortable, so let's stop before we die. Except you won't. You're just soft. Your brain doesn't know where the limit actually is. And that's why mental training matters. Because if your brain decides when to stop, you need to teach it to tell you to stop later. Now let's start with the first step, awareness. Before you train your mind, you need to see it for what it is. A spoiled child that throws tantrums when it doesn't get what it wants. Your mind will tell you things like, we're tired, or we'll go tomorrow, or that we've earned a break. It speaks with authority as though it's a parent, but it's just a child, and it's just noise. Most people spend their whole lives being bullied by that noise without realizing it. They think discipline means using willpower to argue with it, when it actually just means ignoring it altogether. When you stop negotiating with your thoughts, life gets easier. You stop waiting to feel motivated before doing things because you realize motivation is irrelevant. You act because you said you would. That's it. Training your mind is about creating a distance between your emotions and you, between what you feel like doing and what you actually do. There's this study from the University of Pennsylvania where researchers found that people who anticipated temptation, like imagining themselves craving junk food and then choosing not to eat it, were actually far more successful in achieving their goals. In other words, they didn't avoid discomfort, they rehearsed it. That's the essence of mental training. It's exposure therapy for your own weaknesses. So the next time you're in the gym, pay attention to your mind. Notice when the voice says that's enough. And instead of stopping, do 2 more. Not for the sake of muscle, but for dominance, for building mental resilience. Every rep after that voice appears is a negotiation for power, and you're teaching your brain who's in charge. Now let's talk about identity, because that's where most people screw up without even realizing it. You can't build a strong body with a weak identity. If you think of yourself as someone trying to get into shape, you'll always be stuck in that phase. You're reinforcing the idea that your identity and your actions are separate from each other, that the gym is something you do and not something that you are. The people who transform the most, physically, financially, whatever, don't try. They become. They see themselves as the type of person who trains, eats clean, pushes hard. And because that identity feels normal to them, they just keep going. It's no longer discipline, it's just self-consistency. There's this concept in psychology called cognitive dissonance, that discomfort you feel when your actions don't align with who you believe you are. Most people experience that when they fail to meet their standards. But if you rewire your identity correctly, you experience that when you don't train, when you don't eat right. And that's the switch. That's when progress becomes automatic. So instead of saying, I need to go to the gym, say, I'm the type of person who trains. It sounds very subtle, but that phrasing changes everything. It builds a mental standard that your behavior will naturally rise to meet. But let's be honest, it's not enough to think like a winner for a couple of days, because your brain is very lazy. It loves efficiency and comfort and will always find a way to drag you back to the path of least resistance. And that's why mental training isn't a one-time switch. It's a constant workout. You have to load your mind in the same way you load your muscles, with progressive overload. Every week you need to find a way to make it slightly harder to quit. For example, if you usually hit the gym 4 times a week, make sure you hit it 5. If you usually find yourself scrolling on your phone between sets, just leave it in a locker. or in your car. If you normally stop at 12 reps, push for 15. Even if you don't hit it, at least you tried. You're not doing it for hypertrophy. You're doing it to condition your mind for pressure. Because when you stay composed under pressure, you don't just win in the gym, you win everywhere else. But let's address the problem. The real reason people fail at this. They confuse motivation with momentum. Motivation is a spark, it's fleeting. What you need is momentum, and that comes from repetition. Momentum is physics. It's built through consistent force applied over time. That's why when you've been training consistently for months, it feels weird when you miss a session. It's not even discipline anymore, it's just straight up inertia. You're just maintaining motion. The trick is to make your systems frictionless enough to start and structured enough to sustain. Lay out your clothes the night before, have a set schedule, stack your habits on top of each other. You want to remove every possible point where your mind could argue with you. People overestimate willpower and underestimate design. Discipline isn't about being superhuman. It's about building an environment that makes the right choice the easiest one. You don't have to use willpower to not eat a bag of chips if there aren't any chips in your house. Let me tell you a quick story. There was this Navy SEAL who said, when you're exhausted and you think you've reached your limit, you're only at about 40%. It's called the 40% rule, and it's brutal, but it's accurate. Most people live their entire lives inside that 40%. They never test where their real limit is because they always stop at discomfort. They confuse effort with exhaustion. But the people who push through that barrier, they see something different. They realize the pain doesn't actually kill you. It just exposes who's really in control. And once you've seen that, you actually can't unsee it. Because that's when you start chasing discomfort on purpose. You stop fearing pain and you start respecting it. You realize that every hard thing you do is like depositing into an account which pays out in resilience. You train your body to move iron, but you train your mind to move yourself through boredom, fatigue, and self-doubt. And that's the real growth. And here's where it gets really interesting. Your brain isn't just metaphorically changing when you train your mind. It's literally rewiring itself. There's a process called neuroplasticity, where repeated behaviors strengthen neural pathways. And that's why habits exist. When you repeatedly push through discomfort, your brain gets better at it. You literally reprogram your pain threshold, your focus, and your ability to handle discomfort. So when you start your next set and your brain says stop, you'll find it quieter than you did before. Because your brain has now learned that you're not listening. Because the effort is no longer dependent on how you feel. You've automated mental toughness. This is kind of similar to how when you start training, weights don't actually get lighter, but you get stronger. 100 kilograms is always 100 kilograms, and it never stops feeling heavy, but you just know you can handle it. Now let's talk about focus, because your mind can't get better if it's constantly distracted. Attention is like a muscle. It fatigues, it gets stronger, but it can be trained. But most people treat their focus like an open tab on Chrome. Constant notifications, dopamine hits, and endless scrolling. No wonder you can't concentrate enough to finish a set before checking your phone. Here's the brutal truth. If you can't handle staying focused for 45 minutes in the gym, you don't deserve the gains that take years. Focus is the endurance for your brain. And just like physical endurance, it comes from exposure, not comfort. Start by doing small things with full attention. When you eat, eat. When you train, just train. When you read, just read. When you rest, rest properly, not half scrolling and half dozing. That's how you condition your mind to stay present. But you can even take this to an extreme by spending 15 minutes and watching a candle flicker. Because when you stay present, you can focus harder, recover faster, and progress faster. At this point, you might be wondering, how do I know if I'm actually getting mentally stronger? It's pretty simple. You start to feel bored by your old excuses. You hear the same mental chatter, but it doesn't land anymore. You're calmer in chaos, hungrier when tired, and sharper when stressed. That's the progress. That's mental hypertrophy. It's not about becoming emotionless. It's just not being controlled by your emotions. You still feel lazy, but you train anyway. You still feel doubt and fear, but you act anyway. That's the mental muscle. Now let's hit the climax. The mental realization that most people never reach. You can't separate your physical and mental gains. Every time you push through one more rep, one more round, one more day, you're not just training your body, you're reprogramming your future behavior. You're proving to yourself over and over again that you can do hard things, that your limits are flexible, that you can rely on yourself. And that's the foundation of confidence. Not self-help quotes, not manifestation journals, just evidence. Repeated evidence that you can do what you say you'll do. And that's how you become unstoppable. Not because you're stronger than everybody else, but because you've killed the version of yourself that gives up. If you can master your mind, the gains will take care of themselves. Because once you've trained your brain to obey, everything else will follow. Thank you for watching.